Allah, the most merciful and gracious. Today we are going to start a new chapter, and that is chapter number 8, writing negative messages. So today we are going to discuss some of the learning objectives. For example, we will be discussing the 3-step writing process to negative messages, and we will also discuss how to use the direct approach effectively when conveying negative message or negative news. We will also discuss how to use the indirect object and the indirect approach effectively when conveying negative news, and also explain how to avoid ethical problems when using this approach. We will also come up through the successful strategies of sending negative messages on routine business matters, as well as the successful strategies of sending negative employment related messages. We will also discuss the important points to consider when conveying negative organizational news, and also an effective strategy for responding to negative information in a social media environment. So let's come toward the plan the message. So as I told you before, that we will be first of all dealing with the 3-step writing process of negative message. It means that delivering negative information is rarely easy, and negative is never enjoyable. But with some helpful guidelines, you can craft message that minimizes negative reactions. So when you need to deliver bad news, you have 5 goals. Number 1, to convey the bad news. Number 2, to gain acceptable or acceptance for it. Number 3, to maintain as much goodwill as possible with your audience. Number 4, to maintain a good image of your organization. And number 5, if appropriate, to reduce or eliminate the need for future correspondence on the matter. So accomplishing all 5 goals requires careful attention of planning, writing, and completing your message. So let's start with the plan the message. So planning negative messages. When you need to convey negative news, you cannot avoid the fact that your audience does not want to hear what you have to say. To minimize the damage to business relationship and to encourage the acceptance of your message, so plan carefully with a clear purpose and your audience's needs in mind. So gather the information your audience will need in order to understand and accept your message. So selecting the right medium. Selecting the right medium is very critical. For instance, experts advise that bad news for employees be delivered in person whenever possible, both to show respect for the employees and to give them an opportunity to ask questions. Of course, delivering bad news is never easy, and an increasing number of managers appear to be using email and other electronic media to convey negative message to employees. So finally, the organization of the negative message requires particular care. One of the critical planning decisions is choosing whether to use direct or indirect approach. So a negative message that is using a direct approach opens with the bad news, proceeds to the reasons of the situation or decision, or offers any additional information that may help the audience, and ends with a positive statement aimed at maintaining a good relationship with the audience. In contrast, the indirect approach opens with the buffer, then builds up the relations behind the bad news before presenting the bad news itself. If we look at choosing the approach, so to help decide which approach to take in particular situation, you have to ask the following questions. Uh, do you need to get the reader's attention immediately? So if the situation is an emergency, or if someone has ignored repeated messages, the direct approach can be helpful. You get the attention quickly. So ask yourself, does the recipient prefer a direct style of communication? So some recipients prefer the direct approach no matter what. If you know this, go the direct. So how important is this news to the reader? For minor or routine scenarios, the direct approach is nearly always best. However, if the reader has an emotional investment in the situation or consequences to the reader are considerable, the indirect is often better, particularly if the bad news is unexpected. So also ask, will the bad news come as a shock? So the direct approach is fine for many business situations in which people understand the possibility of receiving bad news. However, if the bad news might come as a shock to readers, use the indirect approach to help them prepare for it. If you look at here, by the second stage, that is writing the message or writing negative messages. So by writing clearly and sensitively, you can take some of the sting out of bad news and help your readers accept the decisions and move on. If your credibility hasn't already been established with an audience, so clarify your qualifications so recipients won't question your authority or ability. So when you use language that conveys respect and avoids an accusing tone, you protect your audience pride. This kind of communication etiquette is always communication etiquette is always important, but it demands special care and special care with negative messages. Moreover, you can ease the sense of disappointment by using positive words rather than negative. Let's come toward this portion, complete the negative message. So the need for careful attention to detail continues as you complete your message. So you have to revise your content to make sure everything is clear, complete, and concise. Sorry. So you have to revise your content to make sure everything is clear, everything is complete and concise. Even a small flaws can be magnified in readers' minds as they react to your negative news. So produce clean professional documents and proofread carefully to eliminate mistakes. Careless errors in a negative message can make a bad situation even worse by creating an impression that the sender does not care enough about the situation to invest the time and efforts it takes to produce a professional quality message. So finally, be sure to deliver messages promptly. Withholding or delaying bad news can be unethical, even it can be illegal. Let's come towards another topic, that is using the direct approach for negative messages. Okay, the direct approach. A negative message using the direct approach opens with the bad news, proceeds to the reasons of the situation or decision, and also it ends up with a positive statement and at maintaining a good relationship with the audience. Depending on the circumstances, the message may also offer alternatives or a plan of action to fix the situation under discussion. So starting a bad news at the beginning can have two advantages. uh, Number one is it makes a short-term message possible, and number second is um, it also allows the audience to react the main idea of the message in less time. So opening with a clear statement of the bad opening with the clear statement of the bad news is that if you have chosen the direct object to convey bad news, come right out and say. However, even if the news is likely to be devastating, or maintain a calm professional tone that keeps the focus on the news and do not on the individual failures or other professional factors. So if necessary, remind the reader why you are writing a negative message. Providing reasons and additional information. In the second stage, the step is that you have to give reasons and provide an additional information. In most cases, like if you follow the direct approach, it opening with an explanation of why the news is negative. The extent of your explanation depends on the nature of the news and your relationship with the reader. For example, if you want to perceive or if you want to preserve a long-standing relationship with um, your audience or with your customer, so a detailed explanation could be worth an extra effort such as message would require. So however, you will encounter some situation in which explaining negative news is neither appropriate nor helpful, such as when the reasons are confidential or extensively complicated or irrelevant to the reader. So should you apologize when delivering bad news? Let me give the answer. The answer isn't quite as simple as one simply means an impression of sympathy that something negative has happened to another person. At the other extreme, it means admitting fault and taking responsibility for specific compensations and corrections to atone for the mistake. So some experts contend that a company should never apologize, even when it knows it had made a mistake, as the apology might be taken as a confession of guilt that could be used against the company in the lawsuit. So, however, several states have laws that specifically prevent expression of sympathy for being used as evidence for the legal liabilities. So, in fact, judges or juries or plaintiffs tend to be more forgiving of companies that express sympathy for wronged parties. Moreover, an apology can help repair the company's reputation. Recently, some prosecutors have begun pressing executives to publicly admit guilt and apologize as a part of the settlement of criminal cases. So, unlikely the common tactic of paying fines but refusing admit any wrongdoing. So, the best general advice I would probably say is in the event of the mistake or accident is to immediately and sincerely express sympathy and offer help if appreciated without admitting guilt. Then seek the advice of your company lawyers before elaborating. Let's come towards the positive close. So it means that closing on a respectful note. So after you complain a negative news, close the message in a manner that respects the impact the negative news is likely to have on the recipient. If appropriate, consider offering your readers an alternative solutions if you can, and if doing so is a good use of your time. So look for opportunities to include positive statements, but avoid creating false hopes or writing in a way that seems to suggest that something negative did not just happen to the recipient. So ending on a false positive can leave readers feeling disappointed and disrespectful and disregarded or deceived. So these things should be kept in the mind. Let's come towards using the indirect approach for negative messages. As noted earlier, that indirect approach helps reader prepare for the bad news by outlining the reasons of the situation before presenting the bad news itself. So, however, the indirect approach is not meant to absorb that bad news or delay it or limit your responsibility. The purpose of this approach is to ease the blow and help readers accept the news. When it done poorly, actually, so automatically the indirect approach can be disrespectful and even unethical. But when done well, it is a good example of oriented communication crafted with attention to both ethics and etiquette. So showing consideration for feelings of others is never dishonest. So if we look at here, opening with a buffer, the step one. So in this message is using the indirect approach, opens with a buffer. It means a neutral or non-controversial statement that is closely related to the point of the message but does not convey the bad news. It depending on the circumstances, a good buffer can express your appreciation for being considered, assure the reader of your attention to the request, also indicate your understanding of the reader's needs, also introduce the general subject matter, or simply establish common ground with your readers. So a good buffer also needs to be relevant and sincere. In contrast, a poorly written buffer might trivialize the reader's concerns and divert attention from the problem with insincere flattery or irrelevant material, or mislead the reader into thinking your message actually contains good news. So consider these possible responses to a manager of the order fulfillment department who requested some temporary staffing help from your department. So the example would be very difficult, so let's avoid it, and let's come toward the bad news actually. But before going to discuss the bad news, let's just discuss the second step. I just forgot the second step to discuss, but let's discuss now. In this step, reasons. So it means that providing reasons and additional information. It means that first of all, an effective buffer services as a transition to the next part of your message, in which you build up the explanations and information that will culminate in your negative news. An ideal explanation section leads readers to your conclusion before you come right out and say it. The reader has followed your line of reasoning and is ready for the answer. By giving you reasons effectively, you help maintain focus on the issues at the hand and diffuse the emotions that always accompany significantly bad news. So an effective way to do is to start with positive and neutral points and move through progressively negative points. So provide enough detail for the audience to understand your reason, but be concise. As If we talk about the third step, bad news, so it means that continuing with a clear statement of the bad news. So after you have thoughtfully and logically established your reasons and readers are prepared to receive the bad news, so you can use three techniques to convey the negative information as clearly and as kindly as possible. So the first, make sure you do not overemphasize the bad news. Also minimize the space and time devoted to the bad news. So without trivializing it or withholding information that is important. In other words, do not repeat it or belabor it. Actually, uh, also subordinate bad news within a complex or compound sentence. For example, my department is already short-funded, so I would need all my staff for at least the next 2 months. Also, embedded bad news. So when you embed bad news in the middle of the paragraph or use parenthetical expressions, for example, or profits which are down are only part of the picture. However, keeping in mind that it is possible to abuse this notion of de-emphasizing bad news, so you have to consider these things very clearly and effectively. If you look at the last step, and that step is positive close. So it also means closing on a respectful note. It means that as in the direct approach, the close in the indirect approach offers an opportunity to emphasize your respect for your audience, even though you have just delivered unpleasant news. So express best wishes without ending on a falsely upbeat note. If you can find a positive angle that is meaningful to your audience, by all means considering or considerable adding. However, do not try to pretend that the negative news did not happen or that it won't affect the reader. So suggest alternative solution if such information is available, and doing so is good to use for your time. If you have asked readers to decide between alternatives or to take some action, make sure that they know what to do, when to do, and how to do it. So however, whether type of conclusion you use is that first of all you can use these things. First of all, you have to avoid an uncertain conclusion and also manage future correspondence. The third is you have to express optimism if appropriate, if the situation might improve in the future. Share that with your readers if it is relevant. However, do not suggest the possibility of a positive change if you don't have insight that it might happen. You also be very sincere. Be sincere. Avoid cliches that are insincere in view of bad news. If you cannot help, don't say. If we can be of any help, please contact us. So keep in mind that the close can have a lasting impact on your audience, even though they are disappointed. So leave them with the impression that they were treated with the respect. Okay, let's come with the. Oh, we have already discussed these. Alright students, we are going to start negative messages, sending negative messages on routine business matters. So we will start in the next part of this lecture. So the part 1 has been completed, and inshallah we will discuss the further topics in the next part of this lecture. Thank you so much for watching part 1. Be with us in part 2 as well, so that you may clearly understand all the lectures concisely and profoundly. Thank you so much.